Good evening, parents. Mrs. P again. And it's Friday. Yay. For me and you, right? For all of us. I'm going to send the last video for this week on rational numbers, things that we discussed in class today, kind of give you a little review of what we talked about yesterday and move forward into what we did today. Next week, which is only Monday and Tuesday before Thanksgiving break, we'll go back through and review all these items with your students. So today, we're going to go back into talking about how we're plotting points on a coordinate plane using ordered pairs, x and y, certain numbers, any numbers, rational numbers being integers, fractions, decimals, any numbers can be in there, infinity and beyond, but x and y, certain numbers being placed in there that we're putting on a coordinate plane. So we're plotting those points. We're also locating those points at this time. I'm going to talk to you about some new things on this video today about the value of zero, reflections, distance, and quadrants. So the first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and start with the quadrants. We talked yesterday in the video about your students knowing that the right-hand section, upper right-hand section, has numbers that are plotted in that grid, known as positives and positives, because anything to the right of the number line on X is positive, anything up on the Y-axis is positive. So when you have an ordered pair, the X and Y to be in this section must be positive, positive. That is now called quadrant 1, written with the Roman numeral. We went over this with your students. That's quadrant 1, and the quadrants then go counterclockwise. So from quadrant 1 to quadrant 2, and as you remember yesterday, I said these are negative positive numbers, put these into parentheses. Down here, this is now called quadrant 3, and in this goes negative, negative. And this is now quadrant 4, and we talked about this today on why we write it like this, 5 subtracting 1 meaning 4. In this section, it's positive, negatives. And your students learned and talked about today that we must always do the first number, the X, and then follow it up with the Y, the second number. So if I just want to plot a point, I'm going to do this first thing here of plotting points. I'm going to plot point 3, negative 2. So what I'm going to do is, as I talked about yesterday, X is my first number, Y is my second number. I'm going to move, and then plot my point. So I'm going to start at the origin always, and I try to make it in a fluid motion. I'm going to go over to the 3, and then and that's to my right because it's positive, and then I need to go negative 2. So I'm going to go up or down. Well, since it's a negative, I'm going to go down the Y, 2, and right here is where I will plot my point. And I'm going to call that point P for Mrs. P. So that's my label for that point. It's a capital letter in graphing, because when they get to algebra, geometry, and higher mathematics, they're going to use different letters, lowercase, uppercase, for different things. And graphing on the coordinate plane is a capital P. So that's plotting a point. Follow your X, follow your Y. Move, move. Don't pick up your writing utensil. Just fluid, plot the point. And then we talked about reading points on a graph. So if I put a point here, and I'm going to call it C for class, that C point is located at origin. Go left on my x-axis because I see it's on the negative side. I went 1, 2, 3. I'm going to go up on my y because it's at the top above the x. So I went 1, 2, 3. So my x is a negative 3. I went up 1, so my y is 1. So that is a negative 3, 1. That's my x. That's my y. That's plotting a point. That's reading a point. Plotting, locating. Now I want to talk about the value of 0. Sometimes students will get ordered pairs that have a 0 in them. And of course to us, 0 doesn't have a value, not a number on the number line per se, it's the origin. But we still have to plot ordered pairs if they contain zeros. So I'm going to change these, and I'm going to use some zeros. I'm going to say 0, negative 2, and then I'm going to say 1, 0. And I want you to watch what happens when I graph these, and I did this with your students today. My x is is 0. Oh, it's 0. I'm not going left or right at all. I'm not moving. I'm right there on the origin. X didn't go anywhere. My y is a negative 2. Up or down? Well, it's a negative 2. Again, I'll call it J for Jen. That's kind of bad, J, but there you go. J for Jen. My X didn't go anywhere. My Y is the only thing that moved. And so when you look at this, X was 0. Y is the only thing that moved. Look where your point J is at. It's on the Y axis. So if X is 0, your point ends on the Y axis. Well, let's look at this one. We're going to call this B for best class. My X is 1. I go starting at the origin. It's a positive 1 going to the right. But my Y is not going anywhere. My Y is 0. So I'm going to plot my point right there because I didn't go up or down anywhere. So if my Y is 0, I'm going to end on the x-axis. So if you look, I told the students, it's kind of reversed. X is 0, stay on your Y. Y is 0, stay on your X. There's my B and for my best class. And so that's the value of 0. You can't have 0 in a set of ordered pairs. You just have to know where am I going to land on what axis. My next thing is reflections. We talked about that today. So let's just say I want to make a reflection of this C for class. I know my C for class was located at -3, 1. I can reflect that point across my x-axis or across my y-axis, whichever one I want to do or whichever one I'm told to do. In this case, I'm going to take it across the x-axis. Well, to take it across the x-axis, if you notice, if I go 1, 2, 3, and instead of going up, I go down, I'm now across my x-axis. And instead of going side to side, I went up and down to get that point reflected. So anytime you're going to reflect across an axis, you're actually going in the opposite direction that you move on the axis. Kind of like this one. X was 0, it landed on Y. Y was 0, it landed on X. If I want to reflect across the x-axis, which runs this way, to reflect across it, I must go up and down. And it's the same if I want to reflect this point over here and go across the y-axis. Instead of going up and down to go across the y, I would go across, hope I said that right, I go across to go across the y. The y runs up and down, but I must cross it side to side to make a reflection. And then I can tell what the new numbers are. This being reflected across the x is -3, -1. And look what changed. The x stayed the same because I reflected over it, but the y changed, going up and down. This one, I started off at -3, -3, 1. I went across the y. My number is now 3, 1. What changed? My x changed, but yet I jumped across the y. It's just a flip because of the direction we're going in. The last thing we talked about today was distance. And all this is how do I get from this point to say this point? Pretty easy. It's a lot better if I would do one more difficult and say we go from this point to this point. So I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about this because we're still working on it with the kiddos. I want to go from point C to point P. Now, many teachers would just tell your kids go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9. We went 9. Not with Mrs. P. I like the kids to talk mathematical. So we're going to start at point C. I am going to say I went 1, 2, 3 spots to the y-axis. But I went 3 spots to the right. So I would write it down. Go 3 units, because I don't know what I'm using here. We're just going to use a coordinate grid. 3 units, 3 units to the right to the y-axis. And then I'm going to go 1, 2, 3 more units to the right, plus 3 more units to the right. And then I'm going to go down 1 unit to the x-axis, and I would write that out, 1 unit to the x-axis. And then I'm going to go 1, 2 more units down, plus 2 units down to point P at 3, -2. And that's how I have kids do the distance. So looking at 1 unit to the x-axis, 2 units down to point P, having it be at 3, oops, sorry, I messed that up, 3, -2. So 1 unit down to the x-axis, 2 units down to point P, located at 3, -2. And that's how I have kids talk distance. It is very important, parents, for all your students to know all this information. Eventually, they're going on to algebra and geometry, and they will be using a coordinate grid. Also, I remind the students, hey, graphic engineers, computer designers, animation, it's all by using a grid on a computer base. So it's important for them to know that later on in life. That's it for this week, parents. I will make videos for next week, Monday and Tuesday, I'm certain, or maybe not. I'm not positive, but if I don't, I just want to wish you all a happy Thanksgiving. Have a wonderful holiday with your family. Eat a lot of turkey if that's your thing. And until next time, have a great evening. Bye-bye.